Like, date night, that's great. Anybody can make a reservation. If you successfully make her dinner, you're in. I had polished the floors in the kitchen because Tony Bennett's coming to dinner. I have to make sure the floors are perfect and the house is clean and everything is just amazing.
You've seen the thumbnails. Maybe you saw that one Instagram clip where she sounded different. Suddenly, the internet was spiraling. Is she okay? What happened to her face? For 20 years, Rachael Ray was the high-energy, 30-minute meal queen of daytime TV. But then, she vanished from the big networks. She moved across the world. And honestly, the truth behind her unrecognizable look is way more human and heartbreaking than the stories suggest. Let's get into it. The viral meltdown that wasn't. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the elephant in the Instagram feed. If you've spent any time on social media over the last year, you've probably seen the clips. There's one in particular from late 2024 that went absolutely nuclear. Rachael is in her kitchen. She's cooking a tribute meal for the late Tony Bennett, and something just feels off. Her speech sounds slightly slurred. Her movements seem a bit slower. And the comments section immediately became a war zone of armchair doctors, diagnosing her with everything from a stroke to a drinking problem. It was the kind of viral moment that feeds those "take a deep breath" headlines we see everywhere. But here's the thing. While the internet was busy spiraling into a collective panic, the actual explanation was a lot more human and a lot less scandalous. Rachael eventually addressed the chatter on her podcast, "I'll Sleep When I'm Dead," and she didn't hold back. She revealed that she'd actually suffered a couple of bad falls right before filming. Now, think about that for a second. This is a woman who has spent 30 years on her feet, hauling heavy cast-iron pans and literal cords of wood for her pizza oven. She's a self-proclaimed worker bee who refuses to slow down, but at 57, the body starts to keep the score. Those falls weren't just trips. They were physical setbacks that left her shaken and, frankly, exhausted. When you're nursing a bruised body and trying to put on a show for millions, you're not going to look like the bouncy 30-year-old 30-minute meals version of yourself. Then there was the slurring issue. Beyond the fatigue from the falls, Rachael later pointed to something incredibly relatable but rarely discussed in the glitzy world of celebrity: dental drama. She dealt with what she called a bum tooth, a wisdom tooth, and subsequent dental issues that made clear articulation a nightmare. When you combine vocal cord issues she's had since 2008, she actually had surgery back then to remove a cyst, with a mouth full of dental pain, you get the unrecognizable speech that set TikTok on fire. It wasn't a medical emergency. It was the reality of aging and physical wear and tear in the public eye. But wait until you see how she looks now, in 2026. While everyone was worried about those shaky videos, Rachael was quietly undergoing one of the most successful health transformations we've seen in years. She didn't turn to the magic shots or trendy pills everyone in Hollywood seems to be on. Instead, she leaned into what she knows best: the Mediterranean lifestyle. Reports from early 2026 show she's lost roughly 40 pounds, dropping from 181 to a much leaner 141. She's glowing, but it's a different kind of glow. It's not TV makeup glow, it's "I walk my dog in the Tuscan sun" glow. She's swapped the high-stress NYC lifestyle for yoga, hiking with her dog Bella, and a diet rich in her signature EVOO and fresh greens. She looks more comfortable in her skin than she has in a decade, effectively silencing the worry bait by simply living well. The physical change is jarring, sure, but it's not because she's fading. It's because she's finally stopped trying to meet the impossible energy standards of a daily talk show host. She's letting herself age, she's letting herself heal, and she's doing it with the same "take me as I am" attitude that made us love her in the first place. But physical health wasn't the only thing crumbling in Rachael's world. Her actual world was literally catching fire. Trial by fire, the year everything burned. If you think a bum tooth or a viral clip is stressful, imagine standing on your lawn and watching every single physical memory you've ever owned turn into a pillar of black smoke. That isn't a metaphor. For Rachael Ray, the start of the 2020s wasn't just about a global pandemic. It was a literal baptism by fire that would eventually force her to leave America behind. It started on a summer night in August 2020 at her beloved home in Lake Luzerne, New York. This wasn't just some celebrity mansion. This was the house she had spent years designing, the place where she felt. Rachel and her husband, John Cusimano, were preparing for dinner when a fire started in the chimney. Within minutes, the wooden structure was an inferno. The footage from that night is haunting. You can see the flames licking the Adirondack sky, devouring the very kitchen where she had filmed hundreds of episodes of her show during the lockdown. Rachel and John escaped with nothing but the clothes on their backs and their lives. Think about that for a second. Every handwritten recipe from her grandfather, every photo from her early days at the candy counter at Macy's, every piece of art they'd collected over decades, gone. In one night, the queen of 30-minute meals was left with 0 minutes and 0 memories. She later described the sound of the house collapsing as a shriek she would never forget. It was a total loss, a ground zero moment that would break most people. But the universe wasn't done with her yet. While they were still living in guest quarters and trying to rebuild the Lake Luzerne house, a second disaster struck. In September 2021, Hurricane Ida ripped through New York City. Rachel's longtime apartment in Manhattan, her urban sanctuary, was absolutely decimated by flooding. The roof failed, the drains backed up, and the water damage was so severe that the home was declared uninhabitable. To lose one home is a tragedy. To lose 2 in 13 months feels like a cosmic joke. It was as if the universe was systematically stripping away her physical ties to her old life, one zip code at a time. And then there was the loss that hit the hardest, the kind of loss insurance can't cover. Right in the middle of this chaos, her pit bull mix, Isabu, passed away. If you're a fan, you know Isabu wasn't just a pet, she was a character in the Rachael Ray story, a constant companion through the rise of her empire. Rachel was navigating a literal scorched earth period of her life. She was homeless, grieving her best friend, and still expected to show up on camera every single day to tell the world how to make a perfect burger. The pressure was immense, and you can see the weariness start to set in during those transition years. She was powering through, but the cracks were starting to show. This is the context that most of those "What Happened to Rachel" articles completely ignore. They focus on a wrinkle or a tired expression, but they miss the fact that this woman was processing a level of trauma that would put anyone on the floor. She spent months living in a temporary state, feeling unmoored and disconnected. She talked openly about the shame of feeling sad when so many others were suffering during the pandemic, but the reality was that her foundation had been quite literally incinerated. She was a woman without a kitchen, a chef without a pantry, and a person without a permanent place to lay her head. The rebuilding process took years. Every time they thought they were making progress on the Lake Luzerne house, another delay would hit. It was a constant reminder of what was gone. But looking back from 2026, we can see that these fires were actually the catalyst for her radical move to Italy. She realized that trying to recreate the past was a losing game. The old Rachel lived in those houses, and those houses were gone. To find the new Rachel, she had to go somewhere the fire couldn't follow. She had to go back to her roots, to a place where time moves slower and memories are built in stone, not wood. When you lose your home twice in 2 years, you start asking, where do I actually belong? The Great Italian Escape. If you've ever had a burn it all down and start over fantasy, Rachael Ray actually lived it. But she didn't just move to a new condo or a different coast. She went back to the source. By the time 2024 rolled around, the smoke had cleared from her New York properties, but the emotional haze remained. She needed a place where the walls were thick enough to withstand a century, let alone a chimney fire. Enter Tuscany. Now, we're not talking about a shiny modern villa with a bunch of chrome and glass. Rachel bought a literal stable, a stone structure in the heart of the Italian countryside that had seen more livestock than celebrities over the last few hundred years. This move wasn't just a celebrity vacation, it was a full-scale tactical retreat from the American grind. Living in Italy in 2026 has completely recalibrated Rachel's internal clock. If you follow her now, You see a woman who has traded the 4 a.m. hair and makeup chair for the 6 a.m. sun hitting the olive groves. This 66-hectare estate is her everything now. She spent years and a small fortune restoring this stable, turning it into a home that feels like an extension of the earth. There are no 30-minute timers ticking in the background here. In Tuscany, a meal takes as long as the wood takes to catch fire, and the pasta takes to dry. This shift in pace is exactly why she looks so different to the casual observer. The frantic, high-decibel yummo energy has been replaced by something quieter, something more grounded. She's not performing for a studio audience anymore. She's cooking for herself, her husband John, and their neighbors. And let's talk about the real boss of the Tuscan estate, Bella. After the heartbreaking loss of Isabeau, Rachael found Bella, and this dog has basically become the architect of Rachael's new lifestyle. One of the primary reasons Rachael cited for moving to Italy permanently was the quality of life for her dog. In New York City, a walk is a stressful navigation of sirens and concrete. In Tuscany, it's miles of rolling hills and fresh air. Rachael has joked in recent interviews that she's basically Bella's personal assistant now. They spend hours hiking the perimeter of the property, which explains that 40-pound weight loss better than any diet plan ever could. She's not hitting a soul-crushing gym in Midtown. She's climbing Italian hillsides with a pit bull mix. The aesthetic of her life has changed too. You see her in these 2026 updates wearing linen, less makeup, and a look of genuine contentment that you just can't fake. She's surrounded by vineyards that actually produce her own wine. Yes, she's a winemaker now, because of course she is. But it's not a vanity project. She's involved in the harvest. She's hands-on with the soil, and she's obsessed with the local ingredients. She often talks about how the food in Italy just tastes like food, lamenting the processed nature of what she grew up with in the States. This isn't just a chef finding new recipes, it's a human being finding a new way to fuel her body. But don't mistake this for a retirement. While the Escape to Italy narrative sounds like the end of a movie, for Rachael, it was just the prologue to her second act. She didn't move there to stop working, she moved there to change the way she works. She's built a state-of-the-art filming kitchen inside that ancient stone stable. She's broadcasting to the world from a place of peace rather than a place of pressure. When you see her on screen now, the backdrop isn't a painted set with a fake window. It's the actual Tuscan sun streaming through 200-year-old stone arches. There's a specific kind of bravery in walking away from the pinnacle of American fame to live in a renovated barn in a foreign country. Most people in her position would have just bought a bigger house in the Hamptons and called it a day. But Rachael needed the distance. She needed to be in a place where people didn't know her as the Evo lady, but as the neighbor who makes a mean ragu. This great Italian escape was the final piece of her healing process. It gave her back the anonymity she lost 2 decades ago and provided the literal and figurative foundation she needed to rebuild her empire on her own terms. But don't think for a second that peace means she's retiring. She's actually building something much bigger. The death of daytime, why she walked away. If you want to understand why Rachael Ray looks so different in 2026, you have to understand the golden cage she lived in for nearly 2 decades. For 17 seasons, Rachael was the face of a syndicated powerhouse. The Rachael Ray Show wasn't just a cooking segment, it was a massive 172 episodes a year machine that required her to be on at a level that most humans simply can't sustain. We're talking about a schedule that would break a professional athlete. She was the queen of the 30-minute meal, but her actual workdays were frequently 14 hours long, filled with screaming fans, bright studio lights, and the constant pressure to be the bubbly, high-energy, yummo version of herself that the networks demanded. By the time 2023 rolled around, Rachael didn't just decide to end the show, she decided to abdicate the throne. The decision to walk away wasn't a cancellation in the traditional sense. In fact, the ratings were still solid, but Rachael was done with the traditional rules of distribution. In interviews leading up to this year, she's been incredibly candid about the burnout. She felt encumbered by the daytime format. Think about it. In daytime TV, you have to appeal to everyone. You have to keep things safe, and you have to follow a very specific, polished formula. But Rachael has always been a bit of a rebel. She's the woman who famously said she was completely unqualified for every job she ever had. She wanted to get back to the grit, the mistakes, and the real-life messiness of cooking, which just doesn't fly when you're filming on a pristine set in a Manhattan studio. When she officially signed off her website in early 2025, redirecting her legacy recipes to a new digital home, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of her old life. Fans were mourning the end of an era, but for Rachael, it was a jailbreak. She admitted that her passions had evolved. She didn't want to be a talk show host who happened to cook. She wanted to be a producer who controlled her own narrative. She saw the landscape of television changing, moving away from the appointment viewing of 10 a.m. slots and toward the on-demand, authentic world of streaming. She realized that she didn't need a massive network to reach her people. She just needed her kitchen and a camera. This is the part that people often misinterpret as her downfall. In our culture, when a celebrity leaves a major platform, we assume they're failing. But in 2026, it's clear that Rachael's exit was actually a high-level power move. She traded the fame of being a household name for the freedom of being an owner. She stopped being an employee of a media conglomerate and started her own. She walked away from the makeup trailers and the scripted banter because she was tired of faking the smile while her actual houses were burning down and her body was giving out. She chose her soul over her time slot. The result of that choice is what we see now. The new Rachael isn't performing for the back row of a studio audience. She isn't worried about whether she's on brand for a suburban morning crowd. She's unfiltered, she's sometimes a little tired, and she's 100% herself. By killing off the daytime queen persona, she allowed the real woman to finally breathe. She proved that you can be unrecognizable to the old world and still be exactly who you were meant to be in the new one. She didn't just quit the game, she decided to own the stadium. The free food empire. When Rachael Ray walked off the set of her daily talk show for the last time, the industry whispers started immediately. Is she retiring? Is she over it? The answer, as it turns out, was much more ambitious. She wasn't bowing out, she was buying in. In a move that redefined her career for 2026, Rachael transitioned from being a talent to being a mogul by launching Free Food Studios. This isn't just a production company with her name on the door. It's a high-stakes joint venture with A+E Networks, where Rachael holds a massive stake in the ownership and distribution of her own content. She essentially took the keys to the kingdom, moved the kingdom to her kitchen in Tuscany, and started calling all the shots. The scale of this new empire is staggering. By late 2025 and heading into 2026, Free Food Studios had already secured orders for over 200 episodes of content. Think about that volume. While most traditional networks are cutting back, Rachael is ramping up. Her partnership with A+E's Homemade.Nation block means she's not just producing one show. She's building a whole ecosystem of in-the-kitchen programming. We're talking about series like Rachael Ray's Meals in Minutes and the fan-favorite Rachael Ray in Tuscany. But the real genius of the free food model is that it's not just about her. She's using her platform to launch other Epicurean talents, acting as a mentor and producer for a new generation of chefs who don't fit the perfect Food Network mold. What makes this shift so riveting in the business world is the level of control she now wields. Under her old deals, the networks owned the footage, the sets, and largely, the schedule. Now, Rachael Executive produces everything alongside her longtime partners Brian Flanagan, Anthony Amoya, and Sean Lee. They own the library. They own the IP. When you see her cooking in her Italian villa, she's not just the host, she's the landlord, the director, and the primary shareholder. This independence is exactly why she was able to address her health scares and personal transitions so bluntly. She doesn't have a network PR department telling her to stay polished. If she wants to film a segment with a bum tooth or messy hair because she was hiking with Bella, she does it. The output for 2026 is specifically designed for the modern viewer. She's moved away from the hour-long variety format and into snackable, high-utility content. You can find her across A&E, FYI, Hulu, and even her own YouTube and social channels. It's a multi-platform blitz that ensures she is everywhere without having to be anywhere she doesn't want to be. This business model has boosted her estimated revenue into the $25 million to $50 million range annually, even without the massive syndication checks of the past. She's proved that in the creator economy, niche is the new mass, especially when your niche is authentic Italian lifestyle. But the empire isn't just digital. Rachael has managed to weave her philanthropic soul into the business fabric of free food studios. A percentage of the proceeds from her various ventures continues to fund the Rachael Ray Foundation and Yummo, which in 2025 alone awarded over $1 million in grants to high school culinary programs. She's literally building the future of the industry while she's busy disrupting it. This is the Rachael Ray now that the reality ignores. A woman who used the ashes of her old life to fertilize a global, independent media powerhouse. She's not just surviving, she's thriving on her own terms, in her own kitchen, with her own rules. While she's building a business, she's also tearing down the filters and getting more vocal than ever. I'll sleep when I'm dead. The new Rachael. If you really want to know what's going on in Rachael's head in 2026, you have to listen to her. And I mean and really listen, because she's finally stopped using the TV voice. The biggest revelation of her recent transition hasn't been a recipe. It's been her podcast, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead. The title itself is a classic Rachaelism, a nod to her legendary work ethic. But the content is something we've never seen from her before. It's unscripted, it's raw, and as she's warned her listeners, it's a no-filter zone. For 20 years, she was a guest in our living rooms who had to follow the rules of daytime decorum. On this podcast, she's the one holding the mic, and she's using it to tear down the wall between the brand and the woman. The podcast took the internet by storm in late 2024 and throughout 2025, not because of the guests, though having people like Billy Crudup, Jacques Pepin, and Bob Harper is a flex, but because of the conversations. She's talking about things that would have been edited out of her old show. We're talking about imposter syndrome, the visceral reality of aging in an industry that worships youth, and the sheer exhausting grind of being a worker bee. In one standout episode with her friend Anne Burrell, they didn't just talk about food, they talked about the messy parts of life that make people relatable. They laughed about why perfect is boring, a mantra that seems to be Rachael's new North Star. It's a radical departure from the polished, everything-is-fine energy of 2000s-era Food Network. But what makes this podcast so 2026 is the controversy that came with it. Rachael hasn't just been real, she's been frustrated, and she's let us see it. When the podcast went on a brief hiatus in early 2025, she didn't give a corporate excuse. She went on the record at the South Beach Wine and Food Festival and basically threw her team under the bus, fuming about how long it took them to get the episodes live. "I'm pissed at how long it takes them to put it up," she told reporters. That kind of candor is unheard of for a star of her magnitude. It showed us a Rachael who is done with the polite games of Hollywood. She's an owner now, and she expects the same level of hustle from her team that she gives to every meal she cooks. This unfiltered era is also where she finally addressed those health concerns head-on. She used the platform to explain that her slurred speech wasn't a medical crisis, but the result of being a lifelong klutz who suffered some bad falls and a bum tooth. By talking about it on her own terms, she took the power away from the tabloids. She's proving that being unrecognizable isn't a bad thing. It just means she's finally stopped performing. She's admitted to being terrible at doing nothing, but she's learning how to do something that actually feeds her soul, instead of just filling a time slot. The podcast has become a digital sanctuary for her. Whether she's recording from her home in New York or her villa in Tuscany, you can hear the difference in her breath. There's no countdown clock, no commercial breaks, and no one telling her she can't talk about her bad days. It's the sound of a woman who has survived a fire, a flood, and a career shift that would have retired anyone else. She's exploring resilience in real time. And in doing so, she's built a deeper connection with her audience than a 30-minute cooking segment ever could. She isn't just teaching us how to make dinner anymore, She's teaching us how to survive the scorched earth moments of our own lives. So, after the fire, the falls, and the dental surgery, who exactly is the woman we see standing in that Tuscan kitchen today? The Renaissance. So, who is the woman standing in that Tuscan kitchen today? If you're looking for the bubbly, scripted daytime queen of 2005, you're not going to find her. And that's exactly the point. The Rachael Ray of 2026 is a survivor. She is a 57-year-old mogul who has quite literally walked through fire and come out the other side with a glass of her own Italian wine and a much thicker skin. The unrecognizable look that the tabloids love to harp on isn't a sign of a decline. It's the physical manifestation of a woman who has finally stopped trying to meet an impossible artificial standard. She's swapped the Botox and bright lights aesthetic for the raw, sun-drenched reality of a life lived outdoors. She's leaner, sure, but she's also tougher. What we're witnessing right now is a total cultural renaissance. Rachael has successfully decoupled her brand from the traditional Hollywood machine, proving that you don't need a major network to be a powerhouse. She is producing more content now through Free Food Studios than she ever did on her talk show. But she's doing it on her terms, from her own home, and with her own equity. She's managed to turn a series of personal tragedies, the fires, the floods, the loss of her beloved Isabeau, into the fertilizer for a brand new life. She didn't just rebuild her house, she rebuilt her entire philosophy on what it means to be a celebrity. Today, Rachael is unscheduled. She is a woman who spends her mornings hiking with Bella and her afternoons directing a global media empire from a renovated stable. She has embraced her klutzy nature, her bum teeth, and her occasional slurs as part of the human experience rather than something to be hidden behind a PR curtain. She isn't gone, she's just finally free. Rachael Ray didn't disappear. She just stopped performing for the cameras and started living for herself. And as she continues to broadcast her life from the hills of Tuscany, she's sending a clear message to everyone watching. The after photo isn't always about looking younger. Sometimes it's just about looking happier. Rachael Ray didn't disappear. She just started living for herself. From the ashes of New York to the hills of Tuscany, she's finally free. If you enjoyed this deep dive into her radical reinvention, make sure to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.